The purpose of today's meeting is to talk about how to outfit your shop. We're not doing that much on actual tips and workmanship. We're going to do that later, not the next meeting, but the meeting after that. Today is what do you need to do? Basics, and what are some of the extra things that you might want to acquire over time. We're going to start out with resin. What kind of resins? I think most of you probably know the West 105 resin. It's your basic resin that is kind of everywhere. You get it in any hardware store, West Marine, it's everywhere. And interestingly, CSR, where my boat is, uses nothing but this West resin. But there are other things to think about. One is cost, because West is relatively expensive. And if you take a look at the table on the second page of your handout, you'll see.
For those of you online, there's a handout available on our website.
And you'll see that the West 105 is $2.22 for a gallon of resin plus the appropriate amount of hardness, which for the 105 is a fifth of a gallon, right? So you get a gallon and a fifth for $222. There are a lot of other resins that are available for a gallon kit for considerably less. One of the ones I've become aware of is Professional Boat, or so Total Boat, not professional, Total Boat. And that's used by Matt Steverson. And Matt has got a wonderful YouTube channel about rebuilding Duracell. And has got a lot of, and uses that resin. He's also being sponsored by Total Boat Resin. But it's interesting. There are other resins which are available at a similar cost per gallon kit. You might want to look at, there's a place called Resin Resources or Resin Research. And there's also one called at Solar Composites, which is one of the resources. Solar Composites has a resin called I14, and they'll sell you a gallon kit for, $160. So you can save a fair amount. The problem is trying to figure out what the physical characteristics of the rest are. If you go to West Marine, if you go to West System, they've got full technical data on all your resins. So you know exactly what you're getting. If you go to Resin Research, if you go to Solar Composites resin, it says things like the strongest resin. So that's great, but you kind of want to know exactly how strong, right? Now, I know a lot of you know Mike Wright. So he's a former Commodore of the club and has built a lovely wood epoxy boat and is an engineer. And I called him up and I said, Mike, I want to talk about resins. He said, it doesn't matter. For the stuff that you are building is so over-engineered, so strong relative to the loads, that at least for these F boats, you can use any resin. It doesn't matter. I called up Paul Beaker and he's like, oh, God, no, you need to, I got some terrible resin from MAS. It was really soft and blah, blah. When I was building I14 parts, it didn't work at all.
I14s are super highly loaded boats, though. So,
exactly.
Yeah, there's a difference. Yeah.
Exactly.
Great tool for the job, right?
Yeah.
And if you haven't broken anything this year, you did it wrong.
That's
too heavy.
That's the I14 Fleet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So now it's interesting. If you take a look at the physical characteristics of the ProSet resin, you'll see that it is significantly less stretchy, has a 2.1% elongation as compared to 3.8 for the 105. And the Total Boat is 7.5% elongation. So they're really fairly different.
Does that matter?
That's the question that I called Mike Wright to ask. Yeah, that's the question I had called Mike Wright to, and I didn't get a good answer, to be honest.
I think it depends, again, it depends on how close you're really running to the tolerances. So like Vince and I were working on my mast, and we decided to, use some epoxy to bond some like terminal fittings onto the mast, like there's maybe some shock loads and things like that. And so used the G10, which is probably talk about in a minute.
GFlex, yeah.
GFlex, which is it's toughened and it's also a little softer. It's not as brittle and not as hard. So it has a tendency to absorb. It doesn't crack, right? So easily. So I mean, you still, but if you're doing,
that's when the epoxy is doing all the work.
right.
But if it's just
Well,
layup,
no,
then
even if you have layup too, though. I mean, if you're building something where it's as highly loaded, you have to start worrying about the differences in between your cloth strength and elongation, and that's past probably what we're talking about here. So
I think
I mean,
that's the point is, I think one of the things I really got to, don't get down in the weeds on the type of epoxy. I kind of like the weeds, but buy
this is
something,
opposite for me in that.
buy something that's somewhat cheap, and it's convenient. And what's convenient? Well, West Marine is convenient.
Yeah, and it's
But-
easy.
And if you bought Total Boat, it's cheap and it's a 2-to-1 mixing ratio. It's easy to mix. That's relevant too.
Yeah, that's right.
I heard of somebody building Marples 44 of the epoxy to use to bond the pucks on like road separation.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Why not?
And it worked.
So it really is about convenience and learning the system. Buy an epoxy, stick with it, learn that system, and then you have, keep the 3 different kinds of hardeners: fast, slow, medium. Keep them in stock, and just do that.
And that's where I think West Systems really has a nice system, because you've got West System, the resin is always the same. If it's cold outside, you use fast hardener. If it's hot outside, you use slow hardener. If you want it to not yellow over time, you use clear hardener. And so it's just all kind of set out, and the mix ratios are all set up with their pump system. So you just put the pump in this can, that pump stays in that can. It's just 1-to-1, for everything. And the pump is what does the ratio. So if this is supposed to be 2-to-1, one pump with that is 1 part, one pump with this is 2 parts, or however that works out. So it's like super simple, and it's super forgiving too, because like if you want to put some color in it, you mix up your hardener and your resin, you mix it up, and then you put in like carbon fiber powder, and that turns it black, or you put in aniline dyes that turns it whatever color you want. So it's really super flexible and easy, I think.
Yeah. I use the 105 for most things. I always use it for the wood. And then I use this Pro Set for the carbon laminations, because the other key characteristics for resin is how runny it is, the viscosity. So anytime you're laying up like a relatively heavy, and you're doing a hand layup and you're laying up carbon, you can't see in the carbon if it's fully wet out.
Yeah, it doesn't turn translucent like
With glass,
fiberglass does. Yeah.
glass turns translucent. That's a huge advantage. So I want to make sure that the fabric is wet out. So I warm it up and I use the Pro Set, and it's really runny. And that's a great characteristic.
I do the same thing for laminating. So if you're bonding apart, it really wouldn't matter, right? So if you're bonding apart on a mast and it's, you don't want it running all in place, or you don't want to thicken it so much, I mean, then having one that's a little thicker isn't such a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. So
The performance is the same either way. With carbon.
what do you mean with carbon?
With the resin.
Well, here you see your patching card.
Yeah.
Which you're going to be doing.
Yeah.
So
Because if you can't see it as you're laying it up,
right.
the Pro Set makes sense.
Yeah.
Pro Set will make sense anytime you're working with carbon, because it's a low viscosity resin.
But when you're
What number is the viscosity?
You see it says on the third column, it says mixed viscosity.
Right.
It's 600 CPs, whatever those are.
Centipoise.
I mean, I'm sorry, 544 CPs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is engineers for about half the viscosity of system 3's mixed resin system or 105 using fast hardener. So twice as runny at the same temperature. And if you warm it up, it gets runnier.
Yeah, and that's
So-
the same with any resin. I mean, even the 105, like if you're mixing that in, say 45 degrees, you're doing it outside, it's gonna be super thick. Matter of fact, you can't, it's even hard to pump, right? So
Yeah.
it takes a while to pump. You don't wanna force the pumps. So it's always better, like if you're working outside, set up a little heater and put your stuff over the heater. So keep the temperature up around 70 degrees or 75 degrees.
Why don't you talk a minute about your, while we're on the subject of heat, your thermometer thing?
Oh, okay. So again, I'm not an expert. So, but all my work that I do is outside. I don't have a nice shop like this. So it's rainy, so I have a tarp and I'm working under the tarp and it's cold. So I have to do things to heat. So I, like if I'm doing whole laminations, I usually just get pieces of wood and I make little tripods for like chicken heaters, little heat lamps, you know, those ones with the silver deals. And I like, depending on the area I'm doing, I'll like set up 6 of those and then put them on a board or on the like bars, right? So you can heat up a stretch of area. And then you get those little laser temperature sensors. You get them at like Harbor Freight, they're super cheap. And so just set up the lights, let it warm up, check it when it hits like 75 degrees or whatever. You know, you can go ahead and adjust it so it stays at 75 for your work, and then check it again, make sure the stuff isn't kicking off too hot. Like if it starts getting up into the 90s, then I try and cool things off a little bit. So you can adjust the heat that way, even if you're working outside. The key is you do have to make sure that it's as uniform as possible. And people have pointed out to me that I might be getting some post-cure. So for instance, if I have a spot that's a little cooler, it might actually cure slower than the rest. And what happens is sometimes is the weave will come through. You'll see the weave a little bit of the fiberglass. But in general, I mean, if you have no other options, good way to do it.
Right.
I keep my resin cans on little desktop mug warmers.
Ah,
So you can get
genius.
those for $5 each off of Amazon, and they're controllable within 1 degree increments. So
Oh, yeah,
Nice tip.
nice.
I run at about 95 Celsius across each one of the resins. And then pump out, you have a consistent viscosity as well.
I want to say something about pumps. I hate those pumps. So
They're not super accurate.
they're not super accurate. No. This here is a scale.
This is the difference between Vince and me now.
And I'm down to the gram, I measured by the gram, Then I use 3 different kinds of resins, and I got these, or 3 different mix ratios, and I make up a table so that I got the mix ratio by weight. And then to make sure I don't get totally messy, I have these squeeze bottles. And so you decant from the can into a squeeze bottle, and then you can, add a drip, add a drip, add a drip.
And if I was doing something that needed that, more accuracy, I would totally do that. Or if you're using a resin that is measured out that way, it doesn't have the pumps, and you got to do it by weight. That's the way to do it.
Here's my ratio right here. I use a screw, X screw. You're mixing 2 to 5 small bits.
That's
Take 2 threads and 5 threads.
There you go.
and You're
Yeah.
done.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
But you gotta have a parallel sided cup.
Yeah,
man.
parallel sided cup.
You gotta have a parallel sided cup.
Or the other thing I mix it in is like, from the food stores, you get those plastic trays with vegetables or something in them.
Yeah.
Use them once and shit can them.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it doesn't.
This
One
is,
up Vince, West Spring has a little scale about,
Oh, yes, a little tiny scale.
and they
Yeah.
measure in pencil.
Yeah. Well, I'm filling
But I'm not
if
doing
I'm filling
pencil.
screw holes, I'm gonna get one of those.
He makes a bigger batch, you get a light bulb.
Yeah, it's, well, and some, I mean, some of them are by volume, some are by weight, right? Yeah, so
You
it's
gotta
a
watch
volume
that.
mix.
You can't twist the thing.
Any,
Bottom line is follow the instructions on the can.
Right.
When you measure it,
All right, that's enough of this yakety yak here. Okay, we gotta keep moving, folks.
No,
We
it's
gotta
not.
keep moving. All right. There are two kind of specialized epoxies I want to talk about. One is this assembly adhesive. And this is a Goujon product. I don't have a tube of it because I just use them up, but it's in a twin tube dispenser. It's a great product. It's spendy, but it's a great product. And
Super strong.
it's super strong. It's actually not that strong when you look at the tensile strength, but it just grabs you, you know, it really grabs.
it has excellent shear strength.
Is that what it is?
It's one of its features.
Yeah,
In perfect viscosity, it just stays there.
it's amazing. It's amazing. And it's perfect viscosity. It stays there, but it's not too stiff.
Magical stuff.
So,
It's good for bonding things like hardware or sail track or.
and if you're really feeling, you know, extravagant, you can make a fillet out of it and it makes these perfect smooth fillets. You know?
So bougie.
Is this the Goujon one?
Yeah, so the first one is specialized epoxy. It's the toughened.
It's twin tube.
It's
Like a big syringe.
Yeah.
That's your resin and your hardware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that
It mixes it for you.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
it mixes it for you. It comes out of a mixing wand.
Static,
The two tubes go into.
static mixer.
Yeah. So it mixes as it comes out. If you want true envy, get the pneumatic version. The thing if you're mixing a lot of epoxy, you spend a lot of time going like this and counting. Like, okay, so 60 seconds. You can buy, it's ridiculously expensive, but we were building.
Okay, so that's the assembly adhesive. And then even gooier is the GFlex. So the GFlex is here. And that stuff has an elasticity or an elongation ratio of 32%. Compare that to the 2.1% of the process. So it's a really stretchy adhesive and it can bond just about anything.
So like a lot of people do things like they'll fabricate a part, out of fiberglass, they'll laminate it, and then they'll glue that component onto the rest of the structure. And that's what kind of use that stuff for. Like sail tracks, ProSet and all that. Like if you have a fiberglass mass and you're putting on like one of those plastic sail tracks or whatever, ProSet has products for that. So, more high strength technical.
So outside, I have my boom. And we'll just open this for a moment so you can see, but that's an assembly. All those, there's multiple pieces, some of which I purchased, some of which are fabricated, but they all got to be glued together, right? And so that's what I used was these assembly adhesives to glue the whole thing together and also to make fillets.
If you ever have to do it again.
So this part right here was glued, right?
Yeah, that's glued.
So you fabricated this, and then this piece. Same thing here, this is fabricated. So
Yeah.
The same thing, lay it up. And piece up.
Right. Okay, let's bring it back in and we'll close it up so it doesn't get too cold, but I don't know why the thing didn't go all the way up, but whatever. One thing to bear in mind is that your epoxy can last a really long time. I mean, I've got cans of shit here that, the stuff comes out and it's like rusty looking.
Yeah, it turns brown.
Turns brown. And so just buy the gallon. Don't worry about like, oh, I'm only going to buy the quart because I'm not going to buy the gallon. Just go with it.
It gets so fun after a while, you're going to use it anyway. I
Well,
mean,
yeah, you wake up in the morning and you think, what?
you got a little divot in your deck. You just like mix up some of the wood flour in there and then just put it on there, scrape it flat.
What is the shelf life?
Indefinite, as far as I can tell.
I've had people,
Hardeners continue to thicken over time. I have some old System 3 fast hardener that is honey out of the refrigerator consistency.
Does it still work?
so just harder to
It
mix.
still works. It's nearly impossible to mix.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
My stuff still pours. I got this fast hardener down the whole yard now, but it's really rusty looking. It's dark brown, but it still pours. It still works, you know, and the resin seems to be. I mean,
Resin lasts forever.
How
Yeah.
important is it to keep it from freezing?
The crystallization you're talking about, or
I have it
Just-
underneath my patio, so it's not heated, so if it's very cold for long periods of time. in the
it
winter,
crystallizes. Immerse
I
it
haven't seen an issue with it in the spring, though.
buy a pot from a thrift store so you don't piss off your other half. I speak from experience. And warm it up.
Put
Like
water in water bath.
Just
Water
like,
bath.
just like honey,
If it
right?
freezes and comes back up to ambient, as the springtime comes around, I haven't seen any issue with epoxy.
well, you're basically using West 105 then.
Yeah.
It's very unlikely to freeze. Most resins crystallize in the container. System 3, EAS 18, mass epoxy, and something else. Maybe Total Boat. I don't recall for sure.
So buy a lot. That's my
Yeah,
theory.
yeah, don't, yeah. It's cheaper that way too.
Okay, next, let's talk about additives. So let's look here. Why don't you stand over there for a minute? This is all the powders that you can use. And there are a million different kinds of additives. And one way of looking at this is you make up your own powders and you know, thickeners and whatever. You can also buy pre-mixed thickeners, like this fairing filler is some kind of, you know, proprietary mix or microlight, and they're great. You know, they're a standard kind of thing, and they always have the same consistency. You know, or you can buy, you know, micro balloons, glass balloons, and mix it up with silica and make your own, cook your own. It's a lot cheaper. The milled fiber, you know what that is? It's like cotton or something.
Microfibers, yes.
Yeah.
You got chopped.
It's weird. But
There's also microspheres, quartz.
Yeah.
They're white. And they're varying densities and varying levels of, damn, how hard is this to sand?
yeah,
That's right.
That's the biggest
And the mix has a big part of that too. Like you use this fairing filler. If you don't put a lot of fairing filler in, it's really hard to sand. So if you really get a lot of that in and then make it more of a paste, you know, more of a past peanut butter stage, you know, then
Much
it's
easier to
much easier to sand. Yeah. So yeah, it really depends on what you're trying to do as to what kind of mix you put in. Like if I'm just doing some kind of fixture, like I'm gonna make some sawhorses with some little thing and I need to bond something on there. I might take epoxy and mix my regular sawdust into it. Just
Right, now that
fill
is-
it with that.
Gross.
But yeah, I know. But right. So in other words, it's just a utility thing. It's not on the boat. So, you know, I can use it for that. But then, you know, when you get to stuff that is a little more technical, and it's on your boat, then you up the quality, right? At least that's
Yeah.
what I do.
that makes sense. I mean, one thing, our friend Matt Steverson, whose site you should really go take a look at. He's really good. He uses all, what is it? He uses all fumed silica.
Cavasil, fumed silica, colloidal silica.
Colloidal silica. I guess I have that down.
Respirator for sanding.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
respirator for sanding anything.
Yeah, I wondered about that. It looks like if you just thickened with that, you'd have a fairly hard.
It really, you know, it makes it a lot thicker, a little fat.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. It's a rock.
Sanding glass.
I've used, yeah, it is rock. I've also used milled milled fiberglass fiber. You know, that's really heavy and really hard and strong. You know, so that's something where you, let's say you're gonna put a steel cleat or a, you know, you want to be able to thread it. You know, you're trying to make something that you can thread, you could use this stuff. Jeff, what would you say if you wanted somebody to have just 2 powders? And we're not talking about fairing, just you want 2 additives for putting up shelves.
I just go 1, actually.
Okay.
Well, no, 2. I probably would go 2. I'd have the wood putty or the wood flour, because that's cheap. It's like a big tub and super cheap. And then I would have the microfibers. For me, yeah, not doing fairing. I mean, if I
The fairing is a whole different issue.
yeah, and I wouldn't use this stuff for fairing, frankly. I mean, I've never had really very good success unless you mix it super, super thick. And there are other products on the market that are a lot easier to put on and sand and.
For instance,
Quick fair, yep, there it is. Yeah,
this stuff is
yeah,
great.
exactly. It's awesome.
It's not cheap.
That experience. Yeah.
Yeah, so much experience.
So this stuff is what do I got? Yeah, it's 2-part. It's I got a price in here somewhere. It's like 50. It's like $50 for this kit.
Yeah,
50 and change.
but you'll save that in sandpaper and elbow grease.
Yeah, exactly.
Easy.
Oh yeah, quick fair is $55 for a quart and a half. That kind of fishery.
List or
But it doesn't take that much.
It doesn't take
No, it doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're careful about it and you do it in a couple of different passes, you don't have to put a bunch of blob on it. the first time.
Sanding
It's
is
sand.
really nice.
Exactly. It's almost
And
like
it's consistent. You know, if you make this other stuff up slightly different, you got one hard spot. and
That's
one,
right.
You know,
it's like butter. Nice.
yeah.
And then I'm just gonna say, I know we're not in technique now,
Go
but
ahead,
we're
go
talking
ahead.
about waste and stuff like that. I mean, if you've ever done drywall or whatever, I mean, you know that the less you put on the first time, the less sanding you have to do. So and you waste less product too. So a fairing, I usually try and not put a lot on.
Counterpart to this, the guys at the yard, they saw me putting on these kind of carefully calibrated coats of
Yeah.
fairing. You're just going,
Yeah, well, see their production yard, and you're paying them by the hour
Yeah.
and paying for the materials, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
they were just laughing at me because they just slather that shit on there and then go in there with the double action sanders. And,
The difference between production and
yeah,
us.
exactly. Yeah.
We're not experts, we're
No.
not professionals, again.
Okay, let's move on to reinforcements. Anybody got any questions on the powders? Mix. Wood flour, man.
Yeah, well, it depends on what I'm doing. I mean, I wouldn't use, on my boat, I wouldn't use wood flour or fill it on my boat. Unless it was a wood boat, I use it on a wood boat. But I would rather use the quick fair. If it's a structural fillet, are you talking about a structural fillet or a fairing fillet? Because if it's structural, I use the adhesive fiber, adhesive filler, the white chop stuff.
Oh, this is the
adhesive filler. Yeah. So it's basically this white powder, right?
Yes, what is that? That's cotton, right?
Yeah.
It's cotton fibers.
And it's
Shot glass is hard, but it's super hard and it's heavy. I mean, the cotton is light. Yeah, if you want the strength, the chopped glass is hard to beat.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't worry about wood flour. I mean, it's embedded, it's covered, coated.
Yeah, no,
Wood flour is enormously heavy.
Yeah.
No matter how high a loading you put in, wood flour's density is much higher than you usually want on a foam glass boat.
No.
If you're building a cedar strip boat, by all means, wood
Yeah.
flour is fine.
and it matches.
Yeah,
And
we-
the color matches.
Yeah, right.
If you guys have ever seen any boats built by Russell Brown, he uses wood flour, I believe, on his fillets.
Yeah.
And they are so gorgeous. That's the most beautiful work I've ever seen.
Or marbles. If you've ever seen any of John Marple's boats, also, he uses a significant amount of wood flour. He lowered the density of his wood flour sometimes with colloidal silica and wood flour blended.
That's the cool thing about the mixes too. You can really do almost anything you want. I mean, it depends if you're doing structural things, and you gotta have to be a little more careful. I mean, if you're looking for color, you're looking for weight differences or things like that, I mean, you can mix and match it. And all kinds of stuff.
All right, let's move to fabric. So I have worked a lot with carbon, as you can see. With your glass, regular glass. Now your choices are basically glass, and you got E-glass and S-glass. S-glass being a stronger, less common kind of glass, and you can kind of ignore it for practical purposes. Because if you really want strong and light, you go carbon at this point. I think S-glass was used for like missile nose cones or something where you had to, carbon got in the way of the radial waves.
Aviation.
Yeah,
Primarily, yeah.
aviation stuff. So you got carbon or glass. And then you got to choose what kind of weave. And then thirdly, what kind of weight. So for what you want to have for basic composite work, probably is glass. You don't need to go carbon for most of the stuff. I mean, I wish Bill Quigley was here because he built his whole boat. He built test panels and concluded that there wasn't that big of a weight advantage using carbon. And it's a lot more expensive. So E-glass is just fine. So then the question is, well, what kind of fabrics would you want to have on hand for your basic composite stuff? And you got weave where the fabric is interwoven. I don't know if you can see, it's up and over, like a weave, like your shirt.
Like a basket weave.
Like a basket weave.
Well,
There's different kinds of weaves. There's plain weaves, and then there's twill. And the twill, which is what this is, it's not 1 over 1 over. This is a 2 over 12. So if you look carefully at these strands, you'll see that the strands cross 2 strands before they dive under, and then go under 2 strands and then over 2 strands. That's super advantageous for getting the font to conform. You're not doing vacuum banging. You're just kind of pressing that shit in there. You want the fabric to move. So the twill moves a lot better than the plain weave. This is a plain weave, where you can see it's just 1 up, 1 over 1 under. 90, 90. The orientation 0, 90.
or 090, yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
0, 90.
Selvage edge.
Yeah, that one.
Okay, so you want some woven 090, and I'd always get the twill if you got a choice. I mean, it's just easier to deal with. Then you want some fabric that is 45, 45. Right? So you want
EB.
the double bias. This fabric is held together not by weaving, but by these white lines, this white stitching, which is a kind of a use, I don't know.
Scrim.
Scrim, is that what it's called?
Scrim.
So it has no structural effect. But and if you combine the 090 orientations and the double bias, you get a quasi-isometric, isotropic layout. So that you get, fairly
Strength in all
equal strength in all directions.
Yeah.
And then finally, you probably, in some cases, you want a unidirection, which will be all the fibers going in one direction. Again, this one is held together with a scrim. You can also find stuff that is held together with little lines of hot glue. So those are your basic kind of styles of fabric, right? There are other weird things like triaxial and all kinds of other stuff, but that's the basic. So what you would probably want for your basic stuff is a roll of 090 woven twill and some biax.
There we go.
Then the question is what weight? Okay, so really light is like 4 ounces, 3 ounces per yard fabric. That's too light. Does anybody here use that kind of really light fabric?
If you're going over like as a final skin,
You would use that?
or sometimes you do that over carbon.
Yeah.
So like when you're sanding, you know.
Oh, you
it's
wanna
always
have a
good to
sanding
do
layer,
Final
yeah.
layer, 4 ounce to 3 ounce. So when you're
Yeah, yeah.
sanding, you don't get.
I did that one more than my letter.
You did a final layer.
It's a mistake.
Why that?
They should have vacuum bagged it. It's hard to get all the hair out.
Yes, that is a problem with very light fabrics. They tend to float. But if you're just gonna buy, want some fiberglass, you want to fool around with it, get some glass, get either Biax or 090 or both. And the weight, I would say, the most useful weight is like between 6 and 11 ounces per yard. You can get a lot of, if you're really building a boat, you want some 17, 18 ounce material. But for little projects, 6 to 9. And you can double up the layers. If you want to be stronger, you just add another layer. So I've given you here another.
Can I just say
yeah.
something about
Yes.
this stuff? Actually, I think is the less useful. Because the problem is 090, like people use this for taping. So they'll come here and they'll do this and they'll put this in like that. They'll do their tape over top of that. Basically, that just means that half the fabric is doing absolutely nothing. The fabric's going this way, and most of the stresses are this way. And so, really, what you need to be doing in this is having a 45-45, which I don't really see.
So yeah, we have Biax here. This is a 45-45.
Or even, like say this goes in this way.
Right, or you could cut out strips.
Right, so you cut out strips, and it also conforms better too. I don't know if you messed around with this for a while. What happens is when you put this in this way, it has a tendency to pull away in the center.
Right.
Because those fibers don't want to bend. But if you take an orientation of 45-45 and run like that, then you're actually not getting as dramatic a bend. The fibers are actually bending at a much lower angle. It has a tendency to not only create more ultimate strength, but it also conforms better.
Yes.
So all the taping I make, I just take a big yard roll and I cut strips out, at a 45-degree angle.
This stuff
is-
taping.
This stuff is basically
You
useless.
save yourself 5 rolls of cut Biax.
Where? I've never seen it.
It's right in the materials.
See, I'm learning something.
All right.
But I could.
Biax tape glass, 12 ounces, 4-inch roll, buck 9 linear
With a
yard.
selvage edge. and the
No
whole
cut.
thing? No cut.
I mean, it's cut.
It's
It's not.
stitched together Biax
Oh, okay.
in tape widths. Solar for carbon. Or in
Durham, North Carolina,
North Carolina.
North New Hampshire.
For glass, if you can stand just using 4-inch, you can get that from West.
And you
Or
can get
if you have a
you can get
yard,
it
just
from,
cut it out of the yard.
yeah.
It's so much work.
I don't know.
Keep-
I have a different standard. of
But
weight.
the thing about this is you can get it cheap at Fiberglass Supply for that Biax tape.
Yeah, if you
Biax
get it,
glass
I think that's the way to go. Just
Yeah.
Don't use, I've
This
never
stuff is
found any
terrible.
use for that.
I got
Yeah.
a whole roll of this. Anybody
Yeah.
want this?
No, I don't.
And the other thing is this selvage edge always kind of
It's
pops up.
thicker, right?
It gets thicker.
Makes a lump.
It makes a
Yes.
lump that you then got to sand off, even if you put some foot on it. It's just-
For those of you at home, you can find Vince's handout on our website.
There you go. I've got a list of fabrics here, and you can kind of see they're hard to compare exactly because the rolls are a little different, width and the weights aren't exact, but you can see that the carbon is twice as expensive. Something like that. It depends. I got one thing here. This stuff here, I went to Fiberglass Supply and they said it's $80 a yard, $88 a yard. Like, holy shit, when did that happen? So, I mean, this isn't unbelievably wonderful fabric because it conforms really well. A lot of fiber. It wets out really easy. Great.
Like new pad roll.
Yeah,
Super easy to get in there. Doesn't want to pop back out.
that's good stuff. I got to find a better source for it because one of the best places for carbon is this place, Solar Composites, which is on the first page. And it's cheaper there, much cheaper than Fiberglass Supply. So if you got to go carbon, that's the place to look. So for 12 ounce E-glass Bionics, $10 a yard, something like that. You know, it's doable. You know, you can get a couple yards and play around with it. All right, enough on fabrics. Any other questions on fabrics? Reinforcement fabrics? This is vacuum bagging supplies. This is a batting that is used to let the air migrate through the bag to the hose. So this is vacuum bagging material. This is vacuum bagging film. This is peel ply, which we'll discuss in a minute. And I'm missing one of the other used up.
You don't use plain old rubber screen material for.
Vacuum bags? I never have. I mean,
For the bag, for the bag part?
Huh?
For the bag part?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually,
yeah. So this is good. But we're not talking vacuum bagging today. Okay, cores. So from low density to high density, we start with 5 pounds. So this is your, this is what your boats are built on. This is the hull. The hull is 5 pounds. This stuff is not very strong, but it's fairly flexible. You can bend it into the shape of a hull. And if you heat it, it'll be first. But it's not hard. You can just take your fingernail, do that. It's incredibly useful. I like to have a sheet of this on hand, this for everything. And I make chocks out of it. It's so easy to cut, and it doesn't split. It's much better than plywood. This is a chalk for the boom. Great job. Next up would be if you want to use high density. This is impossible. This is a hunk of my very first dagger tool that I cut up and used for different things over the years. And this foam is really hard and resilient. It's not, this stuff is great. It's not like the polyurethane foams that are used for CNC making molds, something called Elastofoam, which is kind of brittle. This stuff is amazingly resilient and hard and stiff and dense, but not as heavy. It's great stuff. You can't find it in less than a full sheet, and it's unbelievably expensive.
What year is that? What was your original board? 99? The boat's a 99?
1979, I don't know. I have no idea.
There is a, I don't know if they were using it on, they tried for a little while taking the two shells of rudders and dagger boards and injecting a high density 2-part epoxy foam.
Huh.
But I don't think this is it either. Well, it's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's so uniform. I can't imagine it being purple, but maybe.
Doesn't expand. It's just a 2-part pourable epoxy.
I see. Yeah.
But it's like 12 pounds per cubic foot.
This is, I think, denser than that. I'm always looking for like 20 pounds per cubic foot.
It's possible. The cassette, the rudder cassette on my boat is just hideously heavy, even without the sleeve and bearings in place.
Yeah.
So 20 pounds a cubic foot's not out of line.
So you need high density core materials. And the question is always, well, what are you going to use? Now, you could use oak for for instance. Now, what would happen if you used oak? So like in your beam pad,
Ridiculously heavy, or
and it would rot.
yeah,
You know, Jeff has eight beam pads, right?
8. Yeah, they're 8 on an F9.
And they are.
I
oak.
think ash. They specified ash. Actually, yeah.
Eno
Not a good
specified
plan.
ash.
Yeah, it was ash.
Mike used ash pads on scooter.
Yeah.
And he replaced them
Right.
3 or 4 times before he finally said, "Oh, never again."
Yeah.
And he got some high density foam
Right.
from somebody at Boeing
Yeah.
in the black program, maybe. And because we knew somebody then that worked in their
Yeah.
security stuff, and he laid them up with carbon over foam
Yep,
and
that's what I
never
did
had the
too.
problem again.
Right. Yeah, the ones that I did that way are still fine.
Yeah. So
So-
high density foam is super useful. You use it like you could use it
High
under
density, high loads. And
Yeah.
it's, you know,
under
high
your
loads,
winch
so-
pads, you know, in core, very high density, you know. So people end up using marine ply, which is a
So what about-
wonderful material
What about core foam?
for high density. I
You
don't,
can get it
No.
up to 16 pounds.
is that right?
I think the difference is, it depends on what you're doing with it. I mean, like, you were
It has-
talking about, some of it expands.
Right.
And so,
Core foam has very poor shear strength. Very like poor.
Because
And
it's
it-
So the
because it's
skin
expanding as it solidifies.
doesn't adhere well,
And
and
it's
it
like
doesn't, and
fillers.
it can, it's friable,
Oh, yeah,
It
yeah,
depends on
yeah.
So
what-
it can
it
be-
depends on what you're making.
it can crumble.
Yeah.
Well, my problem, I have this canoe that's, made out of Kevlar, super fast, super light, but the gunnel is made out of this aluminum extrusion that's super thin. So it's this hollow gunnel, super thin aluminum. And, you know, you can just crush it real easy. And I'm thinking, just inject high density core foam into it. And all it is compression, which core foam is good in compression.
Good in compression.
Yeah, well, maybe that'll work. So green plywood is, you know, often used as a high density core, you know, somewhat high density cores. Great stuff. I love using it, but I try to avoid anything where you got a screw coming through it. You have to you have to be super careful, you know. You know, and
And if you have a wood boat, that doesn't matter, because it's all wood anyway.
yeah, it's all wood anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
Another piece here.
it's,
So this light, like you have 4 millimeter green ply, put carbon on it. If you see there's a hatch cover hanging around here somewhere. So there. There you go. It's nice and warm now.
Much warmer than the metal bench.
Yeah, right. I'll give it back to you in a moment. But this is, you know, really light, really strong, really cool. So, you know, 6 ounce carbon on top of 4 millimeter marine ply. You know, Russell Brown is building a new folding try, and a lot of it is like,
yeah, it's a big plywood component. I mean,
Yeah.
because, you know, cost versus weight, it's not that big a difference. It's a lot cheaper.
Right.
So, yeah.
Another really good thing about carbon and wood is that it has the same breaking strength. So, you know, imagine taking this, bending it. The wood and the carbon is going to break at the same point. So it's very strong.
yeah,
Like it's efficient.
Probably depending on the layout, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Put glass on there, the wood is going to break way before the glass does.
You add anything to saturate your plywood before you lay it up?
Yeah, I always give it a coat. You know, I just,
You thin it.
no, I don't, I just scrape on a thin coat of epoxy. And I'm usually, with plywood, I'm usually gonna bag it, so it, you know, like that on there. I suppose if you're gonna hand lay it, you wanna put a little bit more epoxy on. So, I got prices here for it. So, you know, your 4mm plywood, a sheet, 4x8 sheet be $115. You know, it's useful stuff. Now, high density foam, another option is crucible. So this is designed for more of a transom, I understand the original use for it. And you can see it's got, you know, strands of glass embedded in it, all that white stuff. And there's a random array of strands everywhere, but then there's also a layer of matte. You can see white lines.
It is great stuff. Doesn't rot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's good product. It's lightweight.
It's not that light.
But, 3/4 lighter than 3/4 inch plywood.
Well,
So,
yeah,
I mean, if you're
it's lighter than big right now.
Yeah,
It's right.
relatively
about-
speaking.
Yeah, it's got a good compressive strength. So, you know, useful stuff.
Looks like, it just feels like epoxy really bomb.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he bonds super well. Yeah. So that stuff is not cheap. A 4x4 sheet of this shit is $183 at Fisher. So, yeah, I know Fisher's has got to be not the cheapest place to buy this shit, but what do I know? I haven't been able to find. I haven't gone shopping for it, so.
If you're buying onesie twosies, you're not gonna find much better, because
Really?
otherwise you gotta pay shipping.
Right. Yeah, shipping a
Fiberglass
4x8.
Supply in Arlington, Burlington, is not a bad source for some of the core materials, and for onesie twosie.
They'll cut the crucible board. They didn't have a price on their website, or I would have put it on there. Like Fiberglass Supply.
Burlington, they're on Water Tank Road by the airport.
Now, there's the name of that place is on the page. It's, you know, they got a lot of stuff. And their website is a lot easier to use than Fisher.
What makes the car?
They're good for small stuff.
If you have to mail order something, McMaster-Carr is not a bad place, but they're going to be far more expensive than Fisheries or Fiberglass Supply or what's your name? Up in Linwood,
Yeah, Fiberglass.
Fiberlake.
Fiberglass, yeah.
They make a better piece of wood than that.
Half inch is 3/4 is what I checked.
So speaking of my McMaster-Carr, the last core material I want to talk about is that. So this stuff is incredibly useful. The backing plates, it's a epoxy glass laminate. Pressure, it's, you know, cooked, pressed, hard as hell. You can tap this stuff and use you can tap a screw into it, and it glues really well. If you know, braid it with your 80 grit, you're good to go. Just glue it in place, cover it over with. It's a really excellent hard point.
I did a little test on quarter 20 bolts and half inch detent, tapped it, ran the quarter 20 bolt in, and the bolt snapped before I pulled out of the detent.
Yeah.
So,
You probably
it's
snap the
staged.
bolts about the same time, 1/4 inch.
With quarter inch sheet now.
Yeah,
And if you have too much money, you can get G10 equivalents in all carbon in 090, 090, 45, 45, quasi-isotropic, whatever,
Yeah.
from Dragon Plate and some other.
So,
Yeah. Carbon.
Rock West Composites
Composites.
for carbon preforms is really great. Some of the boom tubes are from Rock West.
Some of the stuff is hideously expensive, and every now and then there'll be a clearance or a closeout on some oddball thing that's a partial that they can't sell otherwise, and it's actually sort of reasonable.
That's a
What's the name of the place?
Rock West Composites.
Rock West and also Dragon Plate. And there's a place in Mount Vernon that has small diameter carbon tubes because they make stuff for camera mounts and
Drone stuff.
racing quadcopters and fancy kites. Look for carbon tube. What the
And
heck
he's
is the
gonna,
name
he's
of that
gonna think
place?
about it in half an hour here. So come back to us on that.
Come back to you on it. Yes.
So that's our course. Now, consumables. What do you need for consumables? And I saved, there's really, most of this shit is obvious, okay? There's two things you need to know about. One is peel ply. This stuff. Anytime you're doing a layup, you gotta cover the glass, wet glass, with this stuff. Press it on, and the resin will kind of saturate this, dries, you pull this off, get a nice smooth surface ready for sanding.
I think you can skip sanding, actually. if
You can
want
skip
to.
sanding.
Yeah, which is the big key.
The big key, I'm sorry,
A
yeah,
big
you're
time
right.
saver if you want. Yeah.
Huge time saver.
And you don't worry about blush.
And the
And no
blush
blush.
pulls right out.
Yeah.
Pulls right off. Exactly. So one of the things that I saw Matt Searson doing is he takes a sheet of this and to rub the peel ply onto the surface, he takes another piece of peel ply and sort of wipes it on. It's ingenious because it slides. You know, whereas I'm always there with my squeegee, and inevitably the squeegee gets a little burr on it, and wrinkles the peel ply.
Mhm.
So don't do that.
The other thing is if you put that on top and then you squeegee it out or something, it doesn't reorient all your strands, and it doesn't pick all the edges. Like you don't end up with these big long, stringy boogers. Things
Yeah,
like that.
stringy boogers, yes. So peel ply is like the key to, composite good workmanship. The second thing I want to say about consumables is abrasives. I really, I didn't get into abrasives. It's a whole world to itself. But basically, if you're going to be doing composites, it's basically sanding. All the rest of the stuff, sanding is like 80% of the time. Somewhere in there.
At least 80%.
At least
yeah.
80%.
Yeah. My friend who builds boats says, there's nothing romantic about boat building.
No, not anymore.
It's all sanding. Yeah.
Right.
So,
No, I mean, if you're going to build, cedar canoes or something, maybe it's not all
still sanding.
Yeah, well, no.
Yeah, still sanding. Yeah.
Shaping.
They just call it shaping, but it's really.
I have a collection of wind tools, like I've got a spoke shave and, all this other stuff. Never comes off the wall, right? All sanded.
Makes the place look classy.
Yeah, it does make the place look classy. It's purely decoration.
Do one-off period furniture.
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
There is one working tool that I love using for epoxy work. That is, while it's still in what they call B stage of cure,
Oh, I got this one. Scrapers.
long cabinet scrapers. But also, there are a number of companies now that make carbide blades for scraper handles.
Paint scrapers.
It's a paint scraper, and the carbide tool stays sharp for a long time. What are we doing? And they can trim off rungs, they can trim the edges of if you use self-attached tape and sticking up edge of the tape is annoying you, or it's cured really hard and sandable, it can still be on that edge. You can knock that edge down.
Yeah, you can pull off a nice shaving. That's great.
Do that first. Set up this way and sand.
Varying sizes.
Yeah.
Take one that has a triangle shaped blade that's half by half inch triangle.
exert a lot of force with the happy. Yeah. Exactly. You're gonna be cleaning up.
You worry about the chemical in some sandpaper that keeps it from sticking.
That's one thing I do. And early in my doing this, I didn't know about sandpaper. So I just got sandpaper to steer it. It's basically, some kind of grease or something. And so I stay away from that. I go to fisheries and I ask the store manager, that kind of cheerful big nose. Yeah. He'll steal your straight the sandpaper. He'll take, there's different types of sandpaper that are optimized for composites, and that's what you want. You don't want to, your ace hardware sandpaper.
The problem with the stereo is that it's like butter. So you sand your wood or sand your piece, and then if you would paint it, you get fish eyes. I guess hydrophobic. I don't know what you call that. And hydrophilic, and it messes up your bonds too. And you can't get rid of it. It's super hard to get rid of. So solvent won't get rid of it typically.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, little bottle like this, put a couple of drops in.
It's better to use the non-stereo.
Yeah.
Sandpaper.
I'm a big proponent of PM papers, because they've got a total range. They'll tell you this is optimized for wood, this is optimized for composite. Try to go to fisheries and talk to somebody who really knows their sandpapers. I'd say you want 36 grit or 40, for roughing stuff out, roughest you can get, and then you want some 80, and you want some 120.
I never use 120. I go down to 80.
And
80 is great for thicker paints and things like that. And it depends on what you're doing.
sometimes I use 120 just because I'm scared about going through the laminate, so I'm like kind of on it. But yeah, so I got a whole collection up here, and I've been doing some of the finishing work, and you got to go 400, 600, whatever to get. You're sanding a primer, you don't want to go through it, you want it to be really smooth, you don't want to have any scratches, you got to do that, but that's a different issue. The whole finishing thing is not what we're talking about.
Don't get tons of it, and don't be afraid to throw it away, because and it gets harder and harder to use, and it gets hotter and hotter. And if you're dealing with composites, then you don't want a lot of heat. That's like if you're using Vince hasn't gone to it yet, but a right angle grinder with 30 grit on it generates a lot of heat if you're in the same spot. So you want to make sure you don't overheat, keep the thing moving. You'll be miles ahead. Your arms will thank you. If you get the strokes in there, and when it starts getting hard, just put a new piece on.
Last thing on consumables, acetone, you got to buy a lot of acetone. And look around for prices, they vary a lot. I was up at Tap Plastics, they wanted almost $50 for a gallon of acetone. Couldn't believe it. $48.
Home Depot, Lowe's, they usually have cheaper.
Yeah. Fisheries is at 28. Yeah, Miller Paint. So that's, now you use vinegar for cleaning it.
If I get on my skin, vinegar neutralizes the chemical.
Does it get rid of the sting?
It gets rid of the sting. Right. I would use white vinegar. White vinegar. For some reason, I have a tendency to get on my wrists, which actually, I don't know, maybe Vince is going to talk about PPE, but when if I'm doing a bunch of work, I take a set of old socks, put the toe off, put a little thumb hole, put those on, and then put my gloves on. Or you can take
there's one other possibility, which is I get sleeves.
Hey, can I cut in for a minute? Could I cut in? The sound has gotten distorted about 5 minutes ago. I'm not sure what changed. The sound was great, but it's gotten a bit distorted in the last 5 minutes.
Plug it in.
Okay, thanks. So,
Yeah, just grab
Please
that.
make sure the mic orifice is not plugged either. Don't be covering the mic orifice.
Yeah. 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And
The mic might need to be closer to the individual speaking as well. It's kind of cutting out a little bit. It's too far away.
All right, so brushes and rollers. I just want to say one thing about brushes and rollers. Your most useful roller will be one of these mini rollers. Going on. That's spread your epoxy. You want to have these squeegee. You kind of pour it in. That's hold on. You got a vertical surface. You're working in the bow. You gotta get the surface wet out. Here in the glass, wet surface, right? Dry glass. Get in the surface. Then you gotta roll on some epoxy you have left. So this is a good small roller. As Emerson Composites video has a recommendation for a kind of a fabric, small mini roller that's fabric. He says it rolls better and picks up the epoxy. They're great with epoxy because they kind of slide around. So check that.
Are you talking about clothes?
Oh, PPE, I was gonna get to the end. Okay. Tools. Basically, we're talking about ways to get rid of what you just laid up, right? So I'm gonna go through my basic hand tool stuff. This is a relatively rare tool. This is not a super common tool. It's a right angle drill, 3/8 inch. It is so useful with these roll-lock discs. This thing, it's 4 amps and it swings a fairly small disc, right? If you compare it to this thing, it's also about 4 amps. This is a 5-inch disc. This has a lot more power and torque. So with a 3-inch disc or a 2-inch disc, you can just, you can really get it to go very slowly. It has a lot of torque and you have tremendous control.
And slow means less heat. So
Slow means less heat.
buildup.
Right. So this is an incredibly useful tool for any kind of boat building composite stuff. So I got, what do they get for this? $225. I mean, none of these tools are that cheap, but if there are 2 tools here that, well, I keep thinking I'm trying to boil it down. Like, you really need this. This is one. This is the other. You got to have one of these. Okay. I mean, I'm not kidding. This is,
I think Vince is like, these two. These two.
No,
are
no,
really-
the angle grinder.
Two.
I mean, no. The angle grinder is like,
It's a tool of the artist.
A tool of the artist.
It's a tool of the artist, yes.
I see. Okay.
Come borrow one.
I mean, you've seen the stump
Is
bears.
this
and
a
stuff,
variable
right?
speed?
No, I never heard of a variable speed angle grinder.
Do you have are you using a variable speed one?
I just like to
I've
feather it.
got one, I've got a couple.
Makita makes a variable speed sander polisher, is how they describe it. 7 amps or 7.5 amps.
Well,
Same thread pattern as this and any other grinder, like a 4-inch high-speed grinder or whatever. It goes from some insanely slow speed up to 2,000 RPMs, and it's for polishing paint, right? Well, you put a foam pad on it or a hard fiberglass pad and sticky back sandpaper on it, and it's brutal.
Yeah.
And if you want to be as unsafe as you possibly can, you can take a 8.5 by 11 piece of 1/8" plywood and then a smaller backer and a small backer and glue the threaded boss onto it. And you have something, you take a full sheet of sandpaper and it feathers the edges because it's soft at the edge.
Nice.
It's
But-
the corners that are.
Yeah,
killing.
it's the corners that.
But it'll also kill you.
Yeah.
So that is super, super, super insanely dangerous to use. But if you're in a hurry, there you go.
Okay, so I want to say, this thing is good for little goobers and small areas and corners, but that's not its main thing. The main thing that this is good for, really, to my mind, for composites, is these grit blades. You can trim glass, carbon with very little effort and
So
very
useful.
little dust.
Yeah.
You know, you can just, if you want to, like, for instance, let's say you got to recore an area. You want to, make a little incision and take the skin off an area. How else are you gonna, this is the ticket.
You can't really cut yourself with those either.
Right,
I mean,
you can't cut
They're very
yourself.
safe.
They're
So I
noisy
changed my
as
mind,
hell.
3 tools.
Well, this is the slippery slope. I kept thinking, oh, wait, I'm gonna tell him, get just meat, but I can't.
Yeah, 3.
What are your 3?
This one.
Yeah.
The right angle grinder.
Yeah.
And the sander. I think that's, palm sander. So, and I have a different theory from you too, and from you, because the tools I get are not expensive. I go to Harbor Freight, they're like $30 a piece, and I use them until they die. Then I get another one for $30. So it really kind of, some people don't like that kind of methodology. So it kind of depends on whether you really like nice tools or whether you just buy cheap tools. So, but you can do it with either.
I have a 45-year-old skill saw that I still use. So there you go.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
There's 2 diametrically opposed
Yep.
ways of dealing with it.
But you gotta have it, whether you get the cheap tool or you get the expensive tool, get an oscillating sander.
Right.
I mean, because even the $50 one is gonna do. It may not last long, and it may be kind of chintzy, but it'll do the job. But that's the point, is that you want to be able to do that trimming with the carbon, and they all take the same blade.
Yep.
The standard blade.
Yeah.
So,
And they're available cordless now too.
Yeah.
Well,
And
in fact,
there's a
all of
difference. There's a difference in the tools too. Like your tool is probably a lot easier to use than my tool. Like the ergonomics are always better. Like the Harbor Freight ones, the cheap ones
Not
are
if you're
always
left-handed.
hard to.
The ergonomics always suck if you're left-handed.
Do they? No matter what, no matter how
No matter
expensive
what.
the tool.
So-
Okay, there you go.
The trigger lock's always on the wrong side.
Yeah. Well, see that Harbor Freight, you should use the Harbor Freight ones because then they would work for you.
okay,
They're
so
Because they're on the wrong side.
the other tool I want to bring up is this thing is great because it's dual modes and random orbit sander, really useful tool. But this one also has a straight spin mode. So, and there are other versions. This is an expensive tool. I don't think they got it at Harbor Freight. I don't know. But
Nope.
if you just have a random orbit, it's kind of like they're kind of weak. They don't take off that much material. This thing is great because it's got both of it, and it's got really good dust extraction, which is something you should.
Yeah, that is key. Yeah.
Lastly, you got your Dremel tool, it's handy, not that, you don't use it very much, but when you really need to get into a tiny corner, it can be useful. The main thing about the Dremel tool is get these little carbide burrs. Don't fuck around with steel. The steel burrs are useless. The carbide burrs will cut. The big brother of that is this thing, which is a 6.6 amp die grinder, variable speed. You use this, right?
Yeah, I like to borrow Vince's tools.
Yeah, and you're all welcome. You're all welcome to borrow. Really, seriously. But you can see 6 amps, 6.6 amps, and it's spinning this little tiny carbide burr, right? So you can just kind of, get in there. When I was working on the boom, there'd be times when I had to get in at little spots. I just want to take a little bit off. This has so much control because it's got so much torque. You just can erase stuff, you know?
It is practically an eraser. I wish
Yeah.
mine was variable speed. I run mine through a router speed control box and it cuts the power by
This
50%
doesn't,
at least.
yeah, this has got the same amount of torque, you know, it just doesn't, it's just
Yeah.
great. I got, you know, a long burr at one point, long, again, these carbide burrs,
Scary.
scary, you have to run it slow. But, you know, you want to get up in somewhere and
Mhm.
erase some composites, that's a ticket. Lastly, I want to talk about,
I think these are important.
yes, scissors.
Are they on your list?
They're on my list. I haven't figured out the scissors thing. You know, you want for cutting this stuff, you need basically, you need a scissor with a serrated blade. That's the way to go. Otherwise, they just slip. The guys at the yard do this by, they sharpen them with like a really rough file or sandpaper, and they create kind of some tooth on the scissors.
On one side,
Oh, is it only one side?
only on one side.
Okay. Well, that's what I'm doing wrong.
Not this side smooth, that side smooth. They're taking it off at the angle.
Right, take it off the angle. Yeah, but on both blades. One side, you just, but
Only one of the blades should have the
the
very,
rough. Oh,
the
really?
very serious serration.
Okay.
If you buy a pair of special carbon shears, you'll find that.
Okay.
And if I could remember where they came from, they will resharpen your 10-inch shears to cut carbon by doing that
Yeah.
special grind.
This says fabric only. Because, you know, instantly you try to cut the carbon, they go dull really quick.
Yeah.
Or glass. One of the reasons that I try not to use the scissors, I try to use these things, utility knives. The OFA is a great utility knife. They're very sharp blades. They have a variety of blades, thick blades, thin blades. The handle is epoxy proof, which is great. I've had, you know, utility knives that melt with epoxy. That's not so great. But I usually, you know, lay out my material on a table, put it between two layers of plastic, and then cut it to size, which is a very precise way of doing it. When I built the beams, or when I built the boom, that's the way I cut all the material. So, and then you don't worry about sharpening the thing. So,
How do you spell that?
OLFA, OLFA.
Somebody is now making battery operated
Oh, yeah, I saw that. Like a shear.
that is supposed to be carbon safe,
Wow.
stay sharp with carbon because they have carbide edged shears or something. I haven't spent the money for them yet.
Yeah.
I pronounce mine Stanley.
I thought it was
That's
Eric.
user.
Hold on, we got a guy with real world experience here.
We bought electric scissors. They were really mostly just like for seamstress work. But for whatever reason, because we were doing hundreds of yards of like 2-ounce Kevlar, impossible to cut. But it would go through carbon. I mean, we were going through heavy carbon for spars and that stuff. And I bought an extra set of blades and we did a lot and
Wow.
never replaced them. They just,
Wow.
You'll never go back. It's the best $120 you'll ever spend.
Do you have them from sale, right?
I don't even remember where we got them.
Aircraft Spruce has them in their catalog. I don't know who else
It's
has.
the most magical thing you'll ever do.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Next on my list, man.
Yeah. Merry Christmas.
Yeah. So. Bandsaws. You know, this is not something, you know, these are all hand tools. It's easy to take to the boat, easy to deal with. A bandsaw is the single most useful tool for a composite shop, a stationary tool. And you use it with a grit blade. And a grit, don't try to use, you know, two steel blades with or with this stuff, this crucible board. You know, they go instantly.
Yeah, you'd have to have a lot of blades.
You have to have a lot of blades. So you get the grit blades, carbide grit, You could cut this G10. I've cut, half-inch G10. Like no big deal, right? So you can do it with a jig, carbide grit blades are also available for jigsaws, but a jigsaw is a pain in the ass, it really is. So even if you get a cheap bandsaw, you can do all kinds of things. Even if it's a crappy bandsaw with a grit blade, worth it. So,
How hard is the grit blade on the guys to the saw?
well, the guides are only to the side. I mean, the grit is only on the very front edge.
Where do you get those blades?
Grizzly
Oh, really? Oh.
and East Side Saw.
Harbor Freight makes a little one that sits on your desk. Little tiny.
That might be a little
Yeah, the
small.
If you're making models.
Yeah, making models, carbon fiber models.
That's
Perfect. Drones.
Milwaukee
Who's
makes
that?
a Milwaukee
Yeah.
Tools makes a saw they call a portaband.
I've got one.
It's a band saw. It puts a quarter twist on the blade in the cut zone.
I got two.
If you're doing a lot of small pieces or two. And if you can accept wetting it and then drying it afterwards before doing your layups on it, you can use a wet diamond ceramic saw.
Huh.
Oh, for tile?
Tile cutting.
Huh.
Very effectively, and it is zero dust.
Yeah, well, that's a good
That's
deal.
a good idea.
Yeah, that is a good idea.
The good thing is the small ones are portable. There's a
Yeah.
tabletop size one that has about a 15 or 16-inch square table and an 8-inch blade, and it just is a
Goes in a bag.
splash.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a water bath.
Water bath is just splash on the blade because the blade is sticking into a tray of water, but it's dust,
a great
it's dust free.
Yeah. Okay. We talked about scale. We talked about squeeze bottles. Oh, shop vac. Dust extraction. Talking about dust. Now there's two philosophies on vacuums. You got the philosophy. You got the Harbor Freight philosophy.
Shop vac.
Shop vac.
Shop
use-
vac's the only one to buy.
Sure. Yeah, mine actually is a shop vac. Is that good? That's good.
Actually, the
Good.
brand is shop vac.
The brand.
Yeah.
They went out of business.
They went out of business.
Shop vac.
Oh, I take that back. Mine's a rigid. Sorry.
Ah, So,
Shop vac went away.
so the thing about vacuums, the regular shop vac has a single filter, right? And it's a canister. And it's a pleated paper canister. Those fill up with composite dust that's really light and small, and it fills up that filter really quick. So I went for these, my philosophy, back when I was working and had lots of money, I would get these good tools, right? This thing has lasted for, I don't know how many years, 15 years or something. They don't even make the round ones anymore. But the great thing about this is it's got a 2-stage filter, right? So this thing fills up with composite dust, the bat, but it doesn't get on the, there's not that much dust on the canister filter. What?
This is within a couple of percentage points of being a HEPA
Yeah.
quality filter.
And you can get HEPA ones for the regular shop vacs too.
Yeah, but they fill up.
They do.
It climbs
Yeah.
really quick.
Those
They
are
do.
made by
This is
Nickel.
washable
Yep.
That's
and
wonderful.
reusable. Yes, mine lasted 22 years.
Really?
Still get the Delta.
Mine
ones,
lasts
so
one
it's-
project.
My vacuums, the
Oh, yeah.
filters last about a year or two.
50IN.
At the IN, fine.
Those are actually made by a Norwegian company that makes the vacuum.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Anyways, this thing is, it's great.
You get the bags for generic shop vac too.
Oh, you can.
Yeah,
Yes.
The bag is
Pre,
separate.
the pre-filtered.
It doesn't come with it. You buy it when you buy.
How do
the
you?
shop vac.
Those paper bags will also fit at least 3 different
If
manufacturers.
you're doing a lot of woodworking,
If they have that same
get
size.
those dust that.
Yeah, it sits on the, it's on the hose in turn.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's on there.
Well, great. I didn't know that.
That gets all the
But-
chips, and this thing here runs.
So the secret is set your vac up for 2-stage filtering. That's for this composite work. Because, for wood chips, they all kind of fall down to the bottom. It's, not a problem. They
But
don't
you got
clog up the
that dust
filter.
deputy that goes ahead of this thing.
Yes, yeah,
And that thing lasts forever.
Yeah.
Because all the heavy stuff collects in the dust deputy.
yes.
The only spot I can find bags for mine is Red
Red line.
Which is kind of crazy.
What kind of vacuum you got?
It's a shop vac. It's a 2-stage like this.
Oh, really?
The only ones that
Home Depot
fit.
ones have the
They don't have the ones that fit mine for some
oh, they do for mine. It's an older shop back.
Red mine.
Interesting.
What was this, the thin turbo?
Fine
Fine.
tool.
Yeah, this model isn't made anymore, but,
Neither is mine.
yeah.
I have the even older one. It's round and 4 wheels instead of 5.
How much does this cost? Does it say? It doesn't say.
The new one is a bit over $300. They're pretty spendy. They have one really nice feature. You plug your sander into the outlet. And when the machine goes on, vacuum goes on. When the
Right.
machine goes off, the vacuum goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I can turn off now too.
Yeah,
It goes,
there's a
it's auto
delay.
on, auto off.
Yeah.
And
can
and
buy
that's,
it.
that's
You can-
more than my program, because I don't spend that, I don't spend that much money on the tools.
Right.
So mine, I do.
Try it
everything
sometime.
manual.
It's
No,
also,
I'm just saying.
it's
though.
also about
I'm just trying
30%.
to offer another perspective.
Yes, that's why we
So-
got you here, man.
Yeah.
It's
so-
also significantly quiet.
That's right. So basically, I run an extra, and then there's a little suction. I run an extra long hose on it. I leave that thing outside the shop, and then I always wear one of these anyway. So, my feeling is even with double, you're probably still inhaling stuff. You probably shouldn't be. You
Yeah.
should be using one of these anyway.
He's much
And,
better.
and
I am
not
than
and not just you get the full face one because there are chemicals you can absorb through your eyes, and you get that fine dust in your eye. These things.
Yeah,
are
but you
way
can't
better.
see anything. I mean, I got dust on my
I-
glasses. I got dust like that thing.
I take my glasses off. I wear this
No,
without
I take my glasses off.
It means I have to work like, closer. but-
You can buy a draw switch that plugs in both your grinder and your vacuum so that when it draws the
one.
amps, it will turn on the other one.
Yeah.
But they're like $9.
Oh, so
But
you
do
can
they-
make your tool fancy with the.
But do
I'm
they
all about
have the-
making fancy out of garbage.
Do they have the delay that leaves it on for 4
It's,
or 5
it's
seconds?
enough. Yeah, it's enough where it's the motor's got to wind down anyway, but it's 20. I mean, it's not gonna clog your hose with,
So-
it's,
Obviously, I just have too much money.
Yeah. Or you spend it
It's
all on
good.
tools.
Yeah,
spend it
no,
all
there's
on
nothing wrong
tools.
with that. And
Right.
those tools last you forever too, so.
had
There
too
you
much
go.
money.
If you're starting out and
No,
you're
I'm
just
retired. I have no money.
projects, there's probably not.
Yeah, you don't want
can
to.
start slow, get the cheap tools.
Yeah.
Work your way up.
But the only problem with that philosophy is you'll start slow, get a cheap tool, and then you'll live through that piece of shit for 8 years before it finally dies. So that's a downside.
I'm harder on tools than you are.
Yeah. All right. I think you all know what PPE is. You gotta wear your respirator. That's kind of the bottom line.
How
And
about the suit?
the white suits.
The bunny suits are great.
Yeah, these are great. They also keep you warm in the cold. The guys down at CSR live in these things. I think partly because they're warm and they're kind of waterproof. I mean,
They're Tyvek, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
You
are.
can buy Tyvek clothing, just as clothes.
really like Tyvek tuxedos. And
Well, no, Tyvek, rain-
Jackets.
Ranger. Yeah, I believe it. So with that, I'm getting thirsty.
Cold shower,
So I think I'm gonna have a
cold
beer.
shower opens your pores, so it gets the glass out after you're done
Oh.
sanding.
You
So if you
should,
take a hot shower,
Yeah, cold shower.
cold shower when you're done,
Cold
wash your
shower,
hands
yeah,
with
wash
cold
your
water
hands.
first.
Because
Really?
it closes. with it.
Yeah, that is
Oh.
true. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And then it
But it's the big, I think, wear the bunny suit
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
take that stuff off.
So
of it.
you'll
Yeah.
get
And
on this.
and gloves. My
Mhm.
my hands will get so itchy and kind of
Yeah.
So wearing the gloves.
And the bunny suits I like actually are the ones that actually have the hood,
Yeah.
because you just get yourself totally wrapped
Right.
up and
Yeah.
get stuff off of you.
I had to do some work inside while it's in the yard and I was grinding overhead with the angle grinder. And, you know, I was totally encased with everything. I couldn't, you know, hardly breathe, but it worked.
Yeah. I would say I'm gonna, you know, I know I'm on the cheap side of the tool category. I mean, there is one thing that if I would ever like pay more money for, and that's the dust extraction, especially the right angle grinders. I mean, I spend a lot of time taping the shop vac hose to the handle and, you know, grinding and making sure the angle is right. Exactly. So, you know, the dust extraction is pretty nice.
This helped when I was taking off all the gel coat. This helped.
It basically
It wasn't
it leaves the environment such that these don't have to work quite as hard.
right.
So,
Yeah. So that goes on like so.
yeah,
It's also quick release. right?
Yeah.
much easier. They're bulky and it's hard to get them into some spots, but
But if you're doing
for
it,
general stuff,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
and speaking of the, I should mention these are masonry concrete things. I don't know if it's diamond. I guess maybe it is actually, because it's, yeah, I think it is for concrete. Oh yeah, you're the concrete lady.
Yep.
Yeah, these, I got this at Ballard Industrial.
Same as they used to have a huge selection.
They're great. I mean, because
Oh, yeah.
they just go and go and go. They don't have the flexibility, you know, the sanding pad kind of moves it a little bit. So
Yeah, there's no movement.
yeah, you know, if you overcook it, you got a big gouge quick. But for what I was doing, it was useful. So let's wrap it up. Everybody have a beer if you like. Thank you all for
Maybe
coming.
one other thing.
Oh, yeah.
Are you gonna talk about this when you do the laminating, but like syringes
Yeah,
and Ziploc bags?
yes, let's talk about that when we do the lamination.
Okay, sounds good.
We have some
Right,
comments
cover
in chat.
You're taking Q&A, Diane wants to
Oh,
know.
yeah, if anybody got questions, Jeff will answer them.
Yeah.
While Vince
Depends on what answer
quenches
you
his thirst. All right, what do we got, Diane?
For those who have built boats or done extensive epoxy work on your boats, will you describe your boat? Like the length, model, boat
We
name?
both have Farrier boats, about 30 feet, 31. I got a F31 and
And I have F9R, so similar sizes. So, so the work that I've done is gutted the interior, built in all new bulkheads, settees, partitions, sinks, seat backs, all that. Modified, locations of deck hardware, modifications, and hatches, filled in hatches where hatches used to be that I moved. Kind of took the floats off and hung the 31-foot boat in rotisserie style, would flip it and ground down the exterior hull, took all the old paint off, ground out all the divots, repaired all the holes, faired, patched, faired. So quite a bit of work.
Anybody else want to comment on that? What type of
Sounds like a
boat
lot of work.
you've done work on?
It's not hard. Nothing is hard. That's actually my one takeaway from this is that, it's, this is a skill-based thing, and you can build your skill level, and it's pretty easy to build your skill level. And, this kind of work is perfect for people who work full-time, I think, because my MO was, and especially with cure times for epoxy, it's a perfect thing. You get home from work, you do a little bit of layup, you go to work, you come back home, you do a quick sand, you put another layer on, or you do whatever. So it's to me at least, it seemed like it was a pretty easy step-by-step kind of thing to do. You don't have to do it all at once. You can do it in little pieces. Just, build your skill level.
I think the first thing I ever built was a kind of a plywood, super simple 3-plane plywood boat. And I poured on the epoxy really thick, and then I just kind of laid the glass on. I didn't even know about squeegees.
Cool.
Just like,
it was the globbiest damn thing you ever saw in your life, you know.
And see, now he's a pro.
It took me a long time to, you know, there wasn't YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube's a pretty good thing. And frankly, the club, I mean, myself, I have only been doing this for a while now. I mean, there are people in the club who, and some who aren't even here, and, you know, that I've learned a ton from, and, you know, people in the industry. And so, you know,
And people are willing to help. And
they are, they
Yeah.
just ask around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
lend tools.
Clubs are awesome.
Great.
Any other questions?
Oh,
You can do it in your backyard. You can do it in your parking strip.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you can, but you maybe shouldn't. It's nice to have it undercover.
That's true. Yeah, you gotta have it covered. Gotta have it covered.
Does Scott or Joel or anyone else want to comment on what sort of boat they built or did extensive work on?
I think we should hear from you for a little bit, because, you know, you
I've
have it.
been fiddling with epoxies since the late 1970s. And the one I started with was something called Cold Cure. It was a 1-to-1 honey thick resin system from a company in Canada. So Vince has worked with the Pro Set, which I have not. I worked for System 3 for a while, and I have used 5 or 6 different resin systems, and I can say they all work. But if you're going to do laminates with carbon especially, get the low viscosity ones, even if you have to buy way more than you need for this little project you're doing. Don't try to do carbon laminates with thick resin systems. That's my 2 cents worth.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
Nice job.
Thank you all.
Go out and try it.